Welcome to Kindred, hosted by me, Kate, and my sister, Jen. In this podcast, we explore our human relationship to the natural world. In connecting to this planet, we also connect to understanding, compassion, and empathy. How can we see ourselves not as separate or above animals in nature, but a critical and integrated part of an active ecosystem? Through conversations with animal advocates, scientists, conservationists, and many others, we look to inspire a new awareness of how and why we connect to animals and nature in order to repair and restore our relationship to the natural world. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Kindred. Hello, sister. How are you?
Hello, everyone and sister. I am fine. I'm fine.
We're actually just laughing because just as a little, was that a caveat? Was that what you say when you say, hear dogs barking in the background or cats meowing? It's just
disclaimer. It's a disclaimer or whatever.
Well, that's because there's life happening all around, just like at your house, right?
Exactly.
And our mother just arrived at your house and your dogs were going crazy because they love her. So that was really
barking.
Cute. Super cute.
Very cute.
But before we get to our guest, just a friendly reminder to you, Jennifer, and now you can tell our mother.
I sure will.
That you can follow us on Instagram and Facebook at The Kindred Pod. Find all our links and show notes to our guests and episodes on our website, kindredpodcast.co, on our resources page, and you can find us and follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And please rate and review us to help us get out there and into more ears. I'm really working on my professional podcast voice. Can you tell?
I can tell.
Is there a podcast voice?
You sound like a professional podcast voice. Yes.
I'm so professional. Now on to our guest and why we're all actually here. Today we are speaking with Rachel Gardner, Conservation Translocations Officer for the organization Forestry England, about her job in species reintroductions. So the way we usually find our guests is I have an idea of a topic I want to cover, and then I torture Kat about it, and then she leads us on a hunt to find that specific person. With this guest today, our superlative editor, Dan Cooper, who you'll be familiar with, was the one who got me in contact with Rachel. They're friends, and when I found out her work involved forestry and rewilding, I was all in. It's something actually a lot of conservation is talking about these days, and you know, it's not without its conflict and challenges, that's for sure. So today we are headed to England to speak with Rachel all about what Forestry England is up to. So here's a little bit about Forestry England from their website, about their biodiversity plan and the 5 focuses of their vision. So their main goals are: 1, protecting wildlife, which include protecting species and protecting sites; 2, creating networks of open and dynamic habitats; 3, managing ancient woodlands and trees of special interest; 4, restoring species; and 5, forest wilding. And it was saying on their website that Forestry England says that measuring and monitoring change should be the bedrock of their larger plan, which I love. And you know, you and I have talked with many people about this. I do find this a very fascinating. So you and I have talked about this in many takeaways, you know, just about the conversation of reintroducing apex predators and keystone species back into specific ecosystems. It's fascinating, especially when we're talking about all of this on an island 2 times the size of Pennsylvania, right? I mean,
exactly.
So it's not like you're just going to roll in and be like, let's put all these apex predators back in and good luck, everyone. You know, so, and, you know, in every inch counts in England, right? In a space where population grows, farming and production demand increases, and habitat is threatened. Like, how do you balance that and protect forest and wildlife? Like, how do you do that, and what does it ultimately look like, right? And I feel like at the end of the conversation, it's really a deep and complex story of humans and the natural world and getting reconnected and integrated. So many thanks to Rachel for speaking with us today and taking us on a walk through ancient forests and into the future of England's landscape.
Can't wait.
I know, me too. See you at the takeaway.
Bye.
Rachel, thank you for joining us on Kindred today. Could you tell us who you are and what you do?
Hi, Kate. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. So my name is Rachel Gardner, and I work in species reintroductions. And at the moment, I work as a conservation translocations officer under the national team for Forestry England in the UK.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for being here and just chatting through some of our questions that we have. I just thought that we would start with just a little intro, just talking about, these days we hear a lot about rewilding or wilding and what countries like England are doing to, I guess, bring back better balance to its landscapes. So explain to us what that means to Forestry England and what are your overall goals?
Yeah, so we're the country, as in England as opposed to the UK, we're the country's largest land manager. We're caring for the nation's forests and our three kind of key areas around people, nature, and the economy. So we have about 1,500 woods and forests that we manage here in England, which covers about 250,000 hectares. So about 13% of England is covered in forests, which is not absolutely horrendous, but definitely not the kind of the coverage that we'd ideally like to see kind of going forwards. So Forestry England initially started around their main sort of output was commercial timber after the First World War. And we're now sort of looking at how we're developing as an organisation. So it's now around sort of the sustainable management of our forests, considering sort of their resilience going forward, especially in the light of things like climate change, making sure that we're sort of planting species that are going to be able to survive and still provide us timber, but also with a focus on those habitats and wildlife that the forests absolutely need to be supporting. So our values include trying to think kind of beyond a lifetime. So it's really important that we don't do things just for the generation that we're part of. We need to be thinking about sort of what's coming next and what challenges our future generations are going to face as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is, absolutely key to everything, I think. And this is sort of coming in our latest sort of plan, which is showing quite a shift for our organisation, which is really exciting. So when it comes to the sort of the wildlife side of things and the wilding that you've mentioned. So we've got a new forest wilding programme, which is really exciting, which has a particular focus around having these kind of core wild areas, and species reintroductions are also a key part of that, which is why I've kind of come into this role. And when we're talking about those habitats, we're talking about things that are just bigger, better, more connected, just trying to make sure that wildlife has space to expand, to be sustainable, to have viable populations into the future, to move around, and also to be dynamic. I feel like we've kind of got to a bit of a point where, and I think this is a kind of a global issue really, where we have these particular habitats and species, and we go, oh, that exists here in this particular spot, we need to preserve it exactly where it is, and we have a small population of something, and we're just so desperate to cling on to it that we will not allow it to develop or change or kind of expand, because we just don't have that space anymore, because
right.
So much of our land is set aside for agriculture, obviously developments and urbanization. There's so much going on that impacts those kind of populations and habitats. So we've been so careful, but actually we now need to be allowing space for nature to just be more dynamic, and that will enable it to be more resilient. And I think that's really key. And I think what we're trying to do through my organisation is kind of to focus on those sort of those key functions that might be missing, the sort of ecosystem functions, and enable a sort of a focus that is less on those particular species, but on what process might be missing in the kind of bigger ecosystem. And that's hard to know necessarily, but there are obviously some key players there that we kind of look to in terms of reintroductions and things.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's interesting you were saying about 13% of England is covered in forest, and thinking about that in context to, reintroducing like specific wildlife. I'd actually love to get a little landscape history from you and learn a bit about what England looks like now versus what England used to look like. I mean, I think these days we think of England with its beautiful rolling green fields dotted with sheep in the south, or old mountains and valleys of the Peak District in the north, covered in low growing heather and rocky outcrops, or, these pockets of ancient forests that, when you walk through them, you're convinced that like myth and legend are real. I'm thinking of England's shifting baselines, right? But because it has such a long, old history, and I'm thinking of that 13% forest versus, who knows when, what. But talk to us a little bit about what was then versus what we see today, right? Like, is there a then you are using as your baseline for today, and like you were saying, for the future?
Yeah, so this is a really interesting and quite a hot topic at the moment, kind of working out if we're talking about the term rewilding, which we haven't necessarily adopted in the organisation I'm working for at the moment. We've kind of developed our own term, which is allowing us to define that as we wish. So around forest wilding. But rewilding is a term, are we trying to go back to a particular point, or should we be looking more towards how we move forwards and what the future might hold? So I think what we need to remember is that humans have been a part of these ecosystems, these landscapes. They've been part of the UK for, tens, hundreds, thousands of years. Right. So I think what we need to kind of consider around sort of the latest kind of developments that we see is going back to sort of the last ice age and what we've seen sort of progress since then. So we're talking about sort of 30,000 years ago, which was when sort of the last ice age was at its maximum here in the UK. 20,000 years ago. So actually, you've kind of got we've had this idea in the UK that sort of once the ice retreated, forest developed, and the entire of the UK, there's this old quote that a squirrel could travel via the treetops from Land's End to John O'Groats, right, completely, not having to go down to the ground once. And that has been kind of widely adopted for a really long time. And I think we're only just kind of realizing through the latest technological developments that just really wasn't the case. So, for example, there's records of sort of large herbivores in the fossil record being present in sort of Northern Europe before trees. So before the pollen record is showing trees were present in that same space. So we've actually got, herbivores appearing in the landscape before trees came back, which gives this kind of different view to how woodland and more open habitats might have developed. So herbivores are typically going to be moving, through woodland environments, and we have seen them and placed them in those woodland environments in our kind of vision of what history was. But they existed in a more open habitat before those woodlands even got there. And in order for them to survive in those habitats, they would have been, walking around, bashing through trees, creating more open spaces for grazing and browsing, because that's the kind of habitat they needed. And here in the UK now, we have, there's sort of bigger discussions around sort of the megafauna extinction, sort of way back when, which, there's a lot of talk that may well be down to humans as a predominant cause. We're sort of talking 100,000 years ago in that kind of scale. But sort of even these large herbivores from following the last glacial period, their numbers now and the types of species that we had, they're just not here. They're just not with us anymore. So we've lost some serious function through losing those types of species in our environment at the moment. And obviously, as humans started coming back to England following that period as well, we've then ended up with a huge amount of agriculture, which obviously developed over time. And we went through a phase where I think actually that created some interesting open habitats for animals. So we talk quite a lot in the UK about farmland bird species, which are under threat, and we term them as farmland bird species because they were associated with the sort of the slightly older farming methods that we would have had. Yeah. But we're now at a point, obviously, where there are elements of land use and land management with farming that, like you say, that quintessential sort of little pockets of sheep on the Lake District hills and, England's green and pleasant land views, which actually, if you sort of look at it from the view of it is just, we've got monoculture type crops that just aren't providing the scope for biodiversity in the same way that even, sort of older farming methods might have enabled. So we're coming back round, I think, but it's been a shift.
Well, and I was just even thinking about what you're just saying, just thinking about like what I was talking about, like the Peak District, and like thinking of like, the mountains, but just what's growing, the scrubby kind of like, sort of landscape that is it that always been like that, or is that now different as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we've obviously got a variety of habitats that would have existed. So scrub is a very key habitat type, and I think it's been slightly underrated. So you've kind of got that transition between sort of the woodland and the upper sort of species that would have survived sort of partway up kind of at the top of the tree line limit, and then you've got the kind of rocky tops to those mountains. So that would be the more natural kind of landscape you'd expect to see in those upland areas probably. But what we have now typically, so the Lake District, for example, has now got cultural heritage, UNESCO heritage status for, it's farmed landscapes, and that's what everyone associates with the Lake District here in the UK. So the Herdwick sheep that everyone absolutely loves seeing around the Lake District. So we have some, very intensively farmed and intensively grazed parts of the country. And amongst that are pockets of, wonderful habitat for wildlife and sites of special scientific interest and, a lot of designated and protected habitats as well. It's just trying to get that balance and ensure that what we're doing to the soil, the soil is absolutely key, what we're doing to the soil, what we're doing to, some of those pioneer species that creep into these habitats and allow them to become more wild, that we don't lose the ability for them to do that. Yes. And we're just making sure that we're preserving, like I was saying earlier on, just preserving everything for its capacity to be restored as we kind of progress into future generations as well.
Right. And as much as like we're looking at the beautiful rolling hills like outside of Bath and like the patchwork and the green everywhere, you do sort of think like, oh, it didn't always look like this. So I appreciate that sort of taking us back a bit, because I think it really is important to know, what is your baseline, and sort of like what you were talking about before, like where are you kind of starting back, and knowing that what you see today isn't always what it all looked like. But just thinking about that balance, when I think of an ideal balance, like Jen and I, people we've talked about, it's always like, the balance and healthy ecosystem, we think of it in three critical, like in terms of three critical players, right? Like apex predators, keystone species, and ecosystem engineers. Like, and when we're in a place like England, is it critical for apex predators to be reintroduced in order to bring ultimate balance to the landscape? I mean, are reintroducing and supporting keystone species and ecosystem engineers enough? And, when I use those two terms, I'm thinking of like animals like the beaver, or which is an ecosystem engineer, or like the white-tailed eagle that's been reintroduced, which is an apex predator, for example.
Yeah, for sure. So I think what we see by putting species like that back are significant sort of cascading effects. So when we're talking about those species, we're talking about their ability to kind of create positive change that is disproportionate to just putting one species back in the environment in a really positive way. You're putting a population back that is able to just have these incredible knock-on effects to the entire ecosystem. And I mean, Yellowstone wolves are literally the example that comes up constantly, and the impacts that they've had more widely. And, you know, we use that as kind of, you know, I discuss that not infrequently in the job that I'm doing. So it's an interesting one here in the UK. I feel like we lost so many of those species. I mean, in terms of sort of apex predators, other than looking sort of up to Scotland, where golden eagles and white-tailed eagles have persisted, we don't have the species like lynx, wolves, bears in our landscape at all anymore. So we're down to sort of those mesopredators. So we're now at a really exciting point where obviously we've kind of looked at, so white-tailed eagle, for example, Forestry England has been involved with reintroduction back on the south coast on the Isle of Wight, which is fantastic, really exciting.
Right.
But, you know, we're talking about the sort of the extinction of all these species down to human persecution over the sort of, from the sort of 1600s right the way through to sort of the sort of 18th, 19th century. So we've lost all these species, and actually coming back to that shifting baselines idea again. So we have no idea about what a landscape would have looked like 200 years ago. Neither would our parents, our grandparents, or our great grandparents. But before that, it was probably a totally different vision. And I think that the capacity to have such dramatic impacts by putting that kind of species back is just so huge. So we've got, through my current work, we do have a particular focus on that kind of species, just given that fact. But the other thing to bear in mind is that obviously here in the UK, we are in quite, we're in very managed habitats a lot of the time. So there's obviously an awful lot you need to consider when you're looking at bringing species like that back.
Right.
So,
it's not that simple just to plunk them back in. I was thinking that. It just seems like it's a little bit of a different situation in England.
Yeah, I think it's making sure. So we undertake, obviously, in line with sort of all the national and international guidance. So the IUCN's guidelines for conservation translocations are absolutely key to what we do. It's making sure that we have appropriate feasibility studies that cover sort of the biological side of things, whether the habitat's suitable for the species, the ecological side of things, you know, if there are predators, they're suitable prey, and absolutely vitally, the sort of the social and the socioeconomic side of things, because if we don't have people on board with what we're doing, and if people aren't fully aware of, you know, the sort of the potential implications, positive, you know, we can alienate people, and it's really important to avoid doing that, because we need everyone to kind of come together for this kind of thing. You know, we are in a biodiversity crisis, we are facing a climate crisis, and the only way to make this kind of quite significant sort of conservation action happen is through collaborations and partnerships, stakeholder engagement, you know, public consultation, bringing people with us and being part of it as well. I think it's just absolutely key.
Right. Well, and I was thinking a little bit about like the New Forest, which is in the south, and I feel like it wasn't all that long ago. You hear stories of like kings, and it was like the king's hunting ground, wasn't it? And they were hunting lots of big things down there. So that was maybe 500 years ago. And, you know, I think for me, I am that sort of that idiot person that's like, well, I like to go to England. I like to walk outside my door and not come across a grizzly bear. That's relaxing. But it's really like educating us to understand what that actual kind of reintroduction means, right? And England is such an interesting place because it's been settled for so long. It is about like how to not alienate people in the conversation.
Well, and even just here, like we've talked to people about, you know, the conflict with farmers or, you know, people who have grazing animals. They don't want wolves or you know, lynx or mountain lions. So it's a financial situation too. It's not just sort of, well, we like that it's not scary to walk through all these fields and stuff because you're not going to come across anything. But it's also when it's talking about money, it gets extra. So yeah, it's probably going to be a little bit of a slow process because it has been this way for so long that to change it now, like you're saying, 3-4 generations, so far back that you're going that it just isn't good. It's going to take a little time, I would imagine.
Well, I think that's true. And I think it's also like, if you look at like, there's a lot of reintroduction. If you take the beaver, right? What the beavers have changed, putting beavers back in the US has just changed our landscape just for so much the better. And like, just sort of educating people to understand, like, what does that mean? And I think answering the question of, do you need apex predators? I think, like, of course it's going to be yes. It's just, how does that work on a highly populated, pretty small island? And, so that sort of takes me to my next question. Actually, we're kind of already talking about it. Like, forest wilding, which you call it, is, I think probably something people can sort of jump onto a little easier. But like, we're thinking about like wilding a landscape. It does seem to trigger people. And I think people get super invested in land, and change is really hard for people, especially when they feel that something is being taken away from them. And that's sort of what we're talking about. Like, so what helps us understand why we aren't losing something, but actually gaining something? Like, how do you educate us?
Yeah, for sure. And I think this is where, the approaches we take very early on in any of these kinds of discussions, we have to start involving, the whole range of people who may have some investment, some involvement, some even just a vague interest in what you're talking about, is bringing people on board from the start. I mean, change is scary to most people. I think I feel that, if someone sort of comes along and suggests, a change in something that I had set out in my mind that I was going to do in 2 days' time, even that will throw me temporarily. So when we're talking about, some of these bigger species, which are, to be honest, not on the cards yet for England, at least, probably.
Right.
But there are species here. So beavers, for example, we do have beavers coming back to the English landscape. So there are a couple of wild populations that were put back into the environment several years ago now, which was not legal at the time. So they're now being monitored, and they're being left to kind of do their thing. They're expanding up the river catchment exactly as beavers should, and that's all being kind of closely monitored to actually see, like you said, all those positive impacts that they're having, not just for other wildlife, but for flood risk, for carbon capture. There's a huge number of things related to putting a species like that back in the environment. It's fantastic, and we're now in the position where we have a number of sort of captive releases through the work I do at Forestry England. There are a huge number of other organisations in the UK that have got beavers in captive enclosures as well, with the hope that at some point there will be scope to have more wild populations. So beavers are very much kind of a hot topic at the minute, which is really exciting.
It doesn't help. It doesn't hurt that they're cute either, I think.
They are super cute, yeah. And so much bigger than I think anyone ever anticipate. They're like the size of Labradors.
Yeah.
Yes. You see a beaver and you're like, oh, damn, that's
they're sizable.
Yeah. Like, you really are. Like, you think, oh, a little beaver, and it's like, no, their tail's huge. I mean, they actually are impressive animals.
They really are. They are. And I mean, yeah, I've visited so the River Otter down in Devon, which is one of the wild populations at the moment. Went for a walk along the riverbank at dusk there, and saw a couple swimming in the river, which was fantastic. And then my husband and I were just sort of walking along the footpath, and there was this almighty splash, and one must have been literally just behind a tree right next to where we were, and just sort of jumped off. I mean, we nearly went in the river with it. It was it was great fun. But they're just, they're remarkable. And I think the connection with species like that, and actually seeing that myself, yes. That's what kind of can really help with that sort of transition. Once you see physically what's happening, like, you can read documents and you can have people preach to you, but until you physically get in that space and you see what these species are capable of doing, and yes, there are obviously going to be some conflicts. That's inevitable when you have, some of these bigger species in landscapes. But I think the bigger question is around, what if we don't do it? What if we don't start putting these species back?
Right.
What is the other option here? Because we're getting to a point where we are losing so much. If you drive from if I drive from where I live now to where I grew up, the number of bugs on my windscreen is going to be about 10% of what it was, 25 years ago as a kid. And that's scary. Yeah. And I think that's what sort of empowered me to go into the career that I have, is that I can't sit and do nothing, because I think if we don't have an action now, if we don't push to make some of these big and sometimes scary changes, then what is the future for future generations?
That's right. It really is. What if you don't? That's such a good way to put it. And I feel like, there's a couple things. I feel like it's really understanding apex predators too. Like, we really think again, back to the wolf thing, they really are very wary of people. They don't want to be around you, right? And it's like the whole shark conversation, really understanding apex predators. And I think it's also, I will say, England does love their wild areas, the ramblers, which are people who just walk all over the place. And when I volunteered there, they're the 80-year-old women. Every Wednesday, they put their little things on their legs, their leg warmers, and they had their sticks, and they are out there, and they're out there and they're connected. It's like you were saying, when you're walking with your husband and you hear that big splash, you're like, oh my gosh, that's a beaver. And like, it is connecting us back into the ecosystem that we live in. And I think that's so critical.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that fits back to that shifting baseline as well, because if you have the capacity through, whether it's through sort of interpretation at some of these wild areas, whether it's through, we've got a brilliant new David Attenborough documentary on the British Isles that's literally just started, another sort of 5-part series, which is really exciting. Through those conversations, if you can start approaching the idea that what you're looking at now is not how things necessarily were, nor necessarily how they should be, you just start to look at things in a different way. So like, you take a train journey from, I don't know, Birmingham up to Newcastle, and you look out of the window and you just think, actually, what should this look like? Or what could this look like? And, we have to make space for everything. We need farming, obviously, to exist, to produce the food that we need to eat. There are other ways we could approach the way we do that. And I think, there are movements in that field around sort of regenerative farming and more organic farming and intensive farming in particular areas, so that you make more space elsewhere for organic farming or wilder areas. It's just taking a step back and saying, okay, we probably need a new approach, because we cannot keep heading in the direction that we're going in. And what can we do? What steps can we take to that? And I feel like over the last few years, the momentum behind all of this, it just feels huge. And I'm having conversations with people that I don't think necessarily would have had a particular interest in this. They weren't the kind of people who'd be going out for walks growing up necessarily, like I always did, which I think is what's inspired me as well. It's growing up in that kind of setting where you're constantly immersed in it. But it's now in the wider public sphere. People are interested and engaged, and they are starting to explore their areas. I think the pandemic helped with that to a degree, by people jumping on their sort of half hour of walk time during COVID every day and getting out.
Yeah, just getting outside. Yeah.
So just again, like, we ask everyone this question because it's my favorite question. But from your perspective, why do you think this is an important conversation? And how does it connect us to animals and nature? And really, like, I'm wondering what new perspectives or awarenesses can we gain from your work?
So I feel like we're back to the shifting baselines, but going the other way. So we need to set that new baseline for this generation that sets it going back the other way. And I think we're at a really key point to do that. And I think that's really exciting. I think, like I was saying earlier, the key element of this is collaborative work, right? So this is a really good opportunity to connect us with each other and also with nature through doing so. So many people will now have a common goal. They will have different perspectives, and we can all learn from those perspectives, where they may initially come at it from somewhere that you think, oh my gosh, that's so different, I can't even attempt to put myself in their shoes. Actually, the more you talk and the more you kind of appreciate why people have a particular view, you can just understand it. And I think we need to let our walls down in order to allow those conversations to happen. I think there's a heck of a lot we can learn here. So, you know, we're having these discussions around, so like I was talking about the fossil record and the pollen record earlier, you know, it's not that long ago that we wouldn't have had access to that kind of data. You know, what we're able to do now through various technology, and, you know, it's the enhancements there are just opening up so many opportunities, and that's really exciting. And I think feeding all of that back into what we do going forward. So a really key part of species reintroductions is what you do once you've put the animals back. So it's that post-release monitoring. It's making sure that you learn from the positives and the mistakes, the things that have gone wrong along the way, making sure that that gets out into the world, and not necessarily in an academic publication behind a paywall, because that's not necessarily going to be able to be picked up by everyone. You know, the practitioners on the ground versus the academics at the universities. You know, we really need to be working totally across borders, across those boundaries, and I think that's happening now, and multidisciplinary as well. So bringing in, you know, people involved in IT and tech and engineering to kind of have these bigger conversations about, well, how could we enhance our monitoring? You know, we use things like camera traps now, and thermal imagery, and, you know, again, these are things that have developed so recently. Like, there's so many opportunities for sharing information, collaborations, and just learning from each other to make the change that's necessary. I feel like the puzzle pieces are all out there. Yeah, it's just, you know, we need to just really push to bring them all together and make that change, and hope for better for the future, which I think it's going to happen, because I think there's enough good people that I know, and if I know enough good people and they know enough good people, you know, it's all there. It's going to happen.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, I love how you're talking about collaborative work. And I think that is so critical, and just so many different levels. And, you know, I'll just sort of bring it back to the US a little bit. It reminds me of how there's a real push to gain knowledge from Indigenous and Native people and Native communities, and what I call their version of science, but it's like so critical. It's, again, like what you were saying, the puzzle pieces. They're a huge piece of this puzzle that we're missing, and they have those pieces, and we're starting to fit things together a little bit at a time. We're starting to listen more, learn more, and really see that actually we are missing pieces, and who has the pieces that can fill in these blanks. And, you know, I just think that's a lovely perspective.
There's definitely there are cultural drivers behind a lot of people's views on things, and there is so much knowledge that is out there amongst people who wouldn't consider themselves, you know, that they're keen sort of birders, or, you know, they've got information but they're not necessarily involved in some of these projects. So it's reaching out to these people and you know, sort of folks who know their patch of land inside out and backwards, but may not necessarily be doing work in this particular area. But how much can we learn from them? I mean, the opportunities are just vast.
Well, and that's the thing that always gives me hope about the time that we live in now, is there's a lot of stuff that needs to change, but I feel like there's so many brilliant, creative minds that are thinking in these new ways, that if we can, connect those to the 80-year-old who's been watching birds on his property for, you know, 55 years, like there's magic that can happen there. And I think that what you're doing is, and what so many people are doing, is so hopeful, is reimagining how we can start to look at these issues. We can do it in a different way, and we can do this better. Like, there's a better way to come at these things, and if that can get people excited instead of threatened. And I think that's the exciting thing about where we live now, is that this can be really exciting to be like, oh my gosh, we can actually think in a whole new way about this. And I think that's where the hope is, you know, and the spark of this could be actually better than it's been in a long time. So I think what we're doing is so critical because of that. Yeah.
It's lighting a spark in people if we can have some ability to do that through, you know, the work we do and the outreach through the work we do, and bringing people on board early on, and just some engagement that makes them just want to be involved, not feel they have to, but genuinely want to be involved and be a part of the change that is happening. That's just fantastic. It's got to be. I remember someone telling me back when I did my master's course that wildlife conservation is more about people than animals. And I was slightly dubious, but I think nothing has shown me otherwise over the last 10 years. So yeah, absolutely.
So Rachel, is there a place we can follow, your forest wilding programs? Is there live cams we can watch these beavers? Like where can we go to follow the work you guys are doing?
Yeah, for sure. So we've got loads of information on the Forestry England website. So if you just pop that into a search engine, we've got huge amount of details there. We've also got Twitter accounts for Sea Eagle England is the Isle of Wight Sea Eagles project, which we run in collaboration with the Roy Dennis Wildlife Foundation. There's loads of really cool footage of some of the beavers that we have on our sites online, so it's definitely worth a look. So we've had them sort of breeding, so we've got a few generations of kits in those enclosures now, so there's some great footage there. Cool. So yeah, definitely do take a look.
Okay. Yes. And you guys can find all of the links in our show notes on our website, as usual, at kindredpodcast.co. So Rachel, thank you so much for joining us today. You were absolutely lovely to talk to. This was a really fun conversation, and good luck with your work. Please keep us posted how things go. I look forward to seeing little tiny apex predators come into England and little baby wolves and things like that. That'll be great. Can't wait. So yes, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you both so much. That was really, really good to talk to you both.
Hey everybody, welcome back to The Takeaway. So in the intro, I asked, how do we balance human expansion and industry and protect forests and wildlife? And, when we asked Rachel sort of why this is an important conversation, and even before that, I think, her answer in response to this and the challenges of species reintroduction is collaboration. Mm-hmm. We need to collaborate with farmers and conservationists and scientists and policymakers and our city planners. And, it seems like once again, it's all about education and collaboration, right? We've heard.
Yeah, right. Mm-hmm. Right. And getting people, I loved when she talked about, the person who's been bird watching in their backyard for however many years, like that person, they matter just as much. Like, I just love that like, her thing about sort of nobody kind of gets left behind, like we just have to bring everyone on board. I loved that, and yes. I think that's a real benefit to having such a small country. Like, you can get everyone on the same page. I was feeling a little jealous about that listening back. I was like, oh yeah, we can't really do that here because we have so many different kinds of people.
I know, it's so true. We are just so much bigger. But your point is so true. It's like, because I think that's what we were talking about too, when she was talking about the beaver. It's like, even, before collaboration, like you're saying, we need people to experience nature and get why this is so critical, right? Yep. And then she was saying, kind of in context to that, like, what if we don't do this? What if we don't forest and do these things? Can you imagine? Right.
No, that was really profound. Not like what happens when we do this, but what if we don't?
Right.
And it was just a really interesting perspective.
Yes, I did love that. I also love the value embedded into Forestry England of planning beyond a lifetime.
Yeah.
I love that. And, this isn't the first time we've heard about this planning, right? I mean, we've heard that ring through Native American and indigenous communities, and like the thought of how will our actions today affect the people of our future, and how can we be good ancestors?
Right. Yeah.
I thought that was such an important part of their bedrock.
Well, and I think that's the thing, when part of the new ways of looking at things is going back to very old ways of doing things, old ways of looking at things, and I think that's where we are getting smarter finally. We're not just focusing on, we just need all the scientific data. No, we need people, we need humans to care about humans and animals and future and what's going to happen, and that's so much woven through so many of the conversations we have too. It's like, this is about the health of our planet. You know,
Right.
this is all, it's such, but that whole think global, act local. I love that she's doing it in this tiny little country and in these new and different ways that are so exciting.
Absolutely. And like you're saying, like, it is ultimately then about collaborating, right? Talking with the people who live it every day, who have indigenous knowledge, who have, you know, this is woven into the fabric of their culture and the fabric of their day to day, like you're talking about, like bird watchers. Yeah, so just a great conversation. Thanks again to Rachel Gardner for her time today. It's a beautiful story of reciprocation with the natural world and a promise that we make to Mother Nature, that we are listening and we are working to change.
Yeah.
And if you want to find out more about Forestry England, go to their website, forestryengland.uk. And as always, you can head over to our website, kindredpodcast.co, for guest links and show notes. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook at The Kindred Pod for more lovely content. And if you especially like this episode, please rate and review us. And thanks, everyone, for listening, and lots of love.
Yeah, thank you.
Kindred is hosted by me and my sister Jen, produced by Kat Gaddy and myself, sound production and editing by Dan Cooper, original music by Ellie Grace, and our Kindred artwork was created by Lindsay Coffin. Please follow, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts, and feel free to contact us through our website at kindredpodcast.co, where you can also find links to our socials, Patreon page, and show notes.